Hello, everybody, and welcome to tonight's episode of Talking Elite. I am your host, Mr. Adam Glexy, the bearded wolf of wrestling, as in is my new name. So, thank you all for joining tonight. We are discussing childhood memories of professional wrestling. This was actually a suggestion of my co-host tonight. For now, until we have more coming. Jason, how you doing?
I'm doing well, man. Good to see you as always. And I haven't looked at this thing in years, so that was my autograph book when I was a kid and used to get all those autographs. But we can go through and see which one I'm. First one I turn to is Ricky Steamboat. So
There you go.
It'll be interesting to see which one's all I have. So
yeah, no, for sure. From all the autographs I gotta find them because I have no idea where most of my autographs are that I got from professional wrestlers, or any of the photos I've got from professional wrestlers. But yeah, no, I thought tonight when you mentioned this topic, I already had a couple of stuff pre-planned before because you had mentioned it for last week, and then I had a different topic, but now we're doing it this week. Just because it is a good time to be a wrestling fan right now. I mean, things are going well for a lot of promotions. And I guess we could start off the way we start off every Thursday, if you had caught it, about a review of Dynamite last night. I mean, what did you think?
it was okay. I mean, nothing, nothing spectacular to me. I think they have absolutely dropped the ball on Swerve's title reign. In my opinion. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit too when we start talking about the stuff that we grew up on. But there's just no need for him. I mean, you can have him on. I mean, I know TV's changed and you can have him on TV talking or whatever, but to have him out there having competitive matches against, like I said, Nick Wayne, there was no reason for that. I mean, unless it was going to be a squash. Putting him out there against Roderick Strong after Roderick, lost the international title and then went back there, and if I remember correctly, he was yelling about how that Ospreay won the match before he had a chance to go out there. It was like, well, Ospreay beat you anyway, so what's the point? I mean, I think they really dropped the ball on Swerve. I think they waited too long to put it on him, and now they keep putting him on TV every week like he's a television champion, not the world champion. And so that was my big take from last night. Was just Swerve getting in, and then Christian Cage in the backstage area with the Young Bucks. And this learning tree crap with Chris Jericho is just awful. And let's see. I will tell you who's really impressed me over the past couple of months has been Willow Nightingale. I thoroughly enjoyed her progression. I didn't really like her at first, the coming out and the smiling and the clapping. I was like, ugh. And her progression, I really enjoyed her over the past couple of months, and how she seems to be progressing along. And I'm trying to think of what else happened that I'm missing. Of course, I always like seeing Tony Storm and Mariah May. I was glad to see the Page won, Soraya, whatever you want to call her. I was glad to see that, I like Mariah May, but she's up and coming. And, again, I think they've dropped the ball with Paige as well. They gave her that very brief title run, and she really hadn't done nothing since. Which seems to be the ongoing trend with a lot of people, whether it be, somebody new they introduced, they brought in from the indie circuit, or somebody they brought in from WWE or elsewhere. It seems like they're all hot and heavy for them with 2, 3, 4, 6 weeks, and then it's like they just forget about them and put them on backstage segments that don't mean a thing. So that's kind of where I'm at with it. I'm hoping that with some of the stuff that's coming around that we can get back to what with MJF being back. I mean, I'll be interested to see what numbers they did last night, especially with the first quarter with him being out there. I guess Roosh is just going to be a warm-up match or, to get him back in the swing of things. I think it'll be a good match, but, I mean, have they really pushed Roosh that hard to be looked at as a top star, to have that as MJF's first match? I mean, for people that know who he is, of course, but other people that don't, it goes back to, I pointed it out the other night on, we were watching Raw, and, Dragon Lee's been on TV, but they still did the vignette with Dragon Lee before he wrestled his match. And I actually pointed out to her, I said, that's what AEW does not do well at all. Even though Dragon Lee's been on TV, between NXT, probably the past year, with NXT and then the main roster, they're still trying to introduce their audience to who Dragon Lee is. And AEW just throws people out there with, hoping their niche audience knows who he is. But that's, again, I want to see them get more viewers, and I want to make sure they do get that lucrative TV deal they want. And it's like, you're really missing the boat on some things here.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with that. I think agreed that that's one thing WWE does. They keep refreshing you and let you know, hey, even though this person's been on TV, a lot of times, this is who they are, and they've got a match coming up and all this stuff. With Rouge, they really don't do that. I mean, obviously the AEW fan base, with as long as Rouge has been there, they know who he is. But the casual audience watching at home for maybe like the first time, or just passing by the show, are like, well, who's this guy and why should I care for him? And I agree with you. I think this is a good warm up match for MJF to get back into the swing of things, kind of get that ring rust out of there. And yeah, I kind of agree with you. It was an okay Dynamite. I thought entertaining matches last night was, I'm glad that Saraya got a win. I think she needed that. Mariah May has had a couple of good wins and just a good storyline going between her, Mina, and Tony Storm. And then, you've got Blackpool Combat Club almost at full force now that Wheeler Yuta's back and everything like that. So you got them going against the CMLL guys, which I actually enjoyed. I enjoy that match. I always enjoy the CMLL guys. And so, I think also Swerve being wasted on TV as the World Heavyweight Champion for a title match against Roderick, who just lost his, doesn't make much sense to me. You would think Roderick would go back after the international title and want a rematch, as it was in professional wrestling, where, hey, I get a rematch in my claws, like all that stuff. But they kind of skipped over that and just said, hey, go wrestle Swerve. The Young Bucks, Christian Cage, intrigued to see where it's going, but it's like, okay, Christian just lost his match for the World Heavyweight title, so where do we go from here? Again, it's always that what's next. So, yeah, I wouldn't say Dynamite was great last night, but it also wasn't bad. It could have been better. And I think, like you said, we got to see what happens with the numbers now that MJF's back. I think a lot of people are excited to see him back, especially a new kind of MJF as far as a character-wise, as he's, no longer this cocky heel that, hides from people and all this stuff. He's on the mic. He's attacking people. He's shown aggression and really wants to beat people up, like you saw with Roosh. Like him and Roosh just went at it. He wasn't holding anything back. So I'm kind of excited to see how that goes. But I mean, overall, I think it was an okay Dynamite. Again, it could have been better.
And what you brought up goes back to the other thing I was saying too. Like with the CMLL guys, okay, we know who they are, but we didn't get any kind of package or anything like that introducing the audience to who these four guys were. And I mean, it doesn't take more than, you can do a 30, 45 second vignette of just, 60 seconds tops of before the match goes off, or starts, or before they come out, of who they are, just because your casual fan will be like, no, these are jobbers. I'm going to turn the channel. And that's what happens. And it's like, the one thing I give WWE credit for, you can go, all month long and not watch any of their programming. But if you turn on the pay-per-view, the video package they give you before each match, what's going on. I mean, so you can get that, you can get that interest in, oh, okay, all right, this is what's going on between these two guys or two girls. They give you that. And it's, in 5 years, I just wished AEW would have, like I said, you don't have to run your business the way they do, but they have a good business model of how things work behind the scenes, and they have a good business model for what getting characters introduced. You don't have to run your matches the way they do. That you were set up to be an alternative, and that's great. But there's some things they do that you could use that would work.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I get people's take on like, well, why does AEW have to always mention WWE, blah, blah, blah. And I always think the same thing. It's like, if you want to compete against your competitor, and this is the funny part, they're not on at the same time. They're Raw's on Monday, NXT's on Tuesday, Dynamite's on Wednesday, and then Friday night SmackDown on Friday. Obviously, Rampage comes on after SmackDown, but then Saturday you have Collision. So it's not like they're competing against each other. So it's like they should be their own brand and not keep bringing up WWE and just kind of do their own thing. And WWE is kind of just like, this is what we do. Like, we're not gonna keep mentioning the other company, and I think it's smart. And so, although there was that moment on NXT last week when Ethan Page shows up, and the announcer's like, "Isn't he from AE?" And then someone stopped him. So there is that little tidbit of like, okay, maybe they are acknowledging AEW a little bit, but at the same time, they're doing their own branding. What AEW is kind of falling in that line of let's badmouth the other company while not improving ours, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. And if you go back, you've got the Monday Night War logo back behind you. You go back to that. WCW never mentioned WWE until after the Billionaire Ted skit started there.
Mm-hmm.
WWE actually fired that first shot and got that going. People want to give Bischoff a hard time for releasing results and stuff like that, and this, that, and the other. But, and of course, Lex Luger showing up after being on the pay-per-view Sunday night, doing a run-in with the Yokozuna match, and then showing up Monday night. Of course, WWF time's going to get mentioned, but, they didn't start in on the WWF stuff and Eric challenging Vince to fights and everything else until the Billionaire Ted skits. So they kind of, they kind of went back and forth. But like I said, WWE fired that first shot. So
yeah, and just to answer Josh, thank you for tuning in tonight, and thank you for also watching AEZ Canada. I know Matt does a terrific job there. I'm always with them there on Tuesdays. So thank you, Josh, for joining us from Toronto. And yeah, no, I agree. I think that basically was the whole shot back in the Monday Night War era of, hey, we're doing a skit about this guy running this company, so shots fired, let's go with it. Whereas I feel like AEW just kind of just went after WWE for no reason, even though they didn't have to, and not focusing on kind of their own brand.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I said, I never looked at it as a war to begin with, when both of them were on Wednesday nights, because again, to me, NXT is a developmental brand, and on Dynamite, you had Jericho, you had Moxley, you had Omega, the big time stars that they had brought over and brought in to start AEW. And like I said, NXT was just the developmental brand. It wasn't like they were going up against Roman Reigns and Seth Rollins and Drew McIntyre and all those guys, so to me, it was a completely different atmosphere there when everybody tried to make it out the Wednesday Night Wars. And I get they were trying to, get more eyes on AEW, which I have no issue with. But again, to me, it's like to me, you brought yourself down by saying you were feuding with the developmental brand of WWE when you had, future Hall of Fame talent on your roster already.
Yeah, and that's a good point, and also a good point brought up by Davis about Eric Bischoff giving the results off to Raw, because again, Raw was pre-recorded, and so I think that's where a lot of it started backfiring, like Davis said about the one night where Mankind won the title and everybody switch channels. And so, yeah, no, and it just, as much as I love AEW and as much as, we want to see it succeed, it's got to change its course. And I think Dynamite last night wasn't too bad, but again, it could have been better, and they could have gotten focused more on us caring about certain people on the show instead of just bringing them on and having them wrestle, i.e. the CMLL guys, which, again, as AEW fans, we've seen those guys before, so we know them. But again, the casual fan who's just tuning in, never seen these guys before, no idea who they are. So I think with that saying, I think last night, I think Dynamite was hopefully the right step in the right direction to kind of get us ready for Forbidden Door and then build us up for All In. So hopefully that's the path that AEW is on right now.
Yeah, with like I've said before, Tony claims to be a historian and a longtime fan. Well, if he wants to go back in the annals of history, ECW and WCW both did a great job of introducing the luchadors and the Japanese talent they would bring in instead of just throwing them out there. You would get a 30, 45-second video package of this guy wrestling in Japan or wrestling in AAA, and they would introduce the character that way. Even though, and I bring up Jushin Thunder Liger because they brought him around for a long time, going back to the late 80s, but he wasn't there all the time. And every time they brought him in, you always got the week before he was coming, they would announce the match, play the video package, and then the following week it would come on and they would start, pretty much at the beginning of the program, showing the video package on Jushin Thunder Liger before he ever wrestled to get you ready for who he was. And they were doing that back in the 90s. And I think, if Tony's the historian he claims to be, there's just some things he could be doing a lot better, in my opinion.
No, and I totally agree. And now that we've given our review of Dynamite and what we think where AEW needs to go, let's go ahead and get started on our topic tonight. Again, this topic was suggested by you, and I thought it was great. And again, we would have done it last week, but had already planned, so I'm like, let's do it next week, this week. And so this is just something I like doing because it's reminiscing. I guess it's a lot of us, not just as wrestling fans, but just as adults reminiscing about our childhood and just the sugar on top of being professional wrestling fans on top of that. Remember the good old days. And I guess we could start this topic off with, the earliest match you remember as a kid. I guess we can start off that way. That got you really hooked into pro wrestling.
I cannot think of the earliest match that I saw. I can tell you the two angles that I remember, and the one I know I had been watching prior to that, but that actually led up to Starrcade 83 was when Harley Race put the $25,000 bounty on Ric Flair, and Bob Orton Jr. and Dick Slater collected that bounty. And then you saw a couple of weeks later, they put a video package out of, not a package, but a video of Ric Flair, announcing his retirement. Said he was going to, his body couldn't take it, that it was just, he had a family. He wasn't going to do that with, just to basically say he was done because of the bounty being put out on him and the beating that Orton and Slater gave him. Well, after that video finished, Harley Race, Slater and Orton come out on TV laughing. We did it. And here comes Ric Flair in a suit with a baseball bat, beating the dog shit out of all three of them.
Yeah.
And ripping his jacket off and saying, you think I'm done? You're crazy. I'm taking that world title back, which, led up to Starrcade 83 of Flair for the gold. That's that. And then this is beforehand, but when Roddy Piper got brought into Georgia Championship Wrestling, and a lot of people, you go back and look at it, yes, he was a wrestler, but the people in Georgia didn't know that yet. He was brought in as Rod Piper to be Gordon Soley's co-host on Georgia Championship Wrestling. Mm-hmm. He was very outspoken. He was the heel color commentator, and always bad mouthing the baby faces and doing stuff that Roddy Piper did over his career. But then there was, I don't remember what Don Morocco's beef with Gordon Soley was, what had been said, but Don Morocco come out there, basically picking at Gordon Soley and getting in his face and, pushing on him, and Piper, Piper became Roddy Piper and took up for Gordon Soley and became a massive babyface when he first started wrestling before he turned heel. And so those are my first two earliest memories. But like I said, when I met Roddy Piper, it was in 81 and he was a heel, feuding with Wahoo McDaniel over the U.S. title. So I'd have to look up the dates to see exactly when that happened. But those are my two earliest memories. But, of course, remember, Steamboat and Youngblood feuding with Slaughter and Kernodle, feuding with the Briscoes. Jay Youngblood was the first one that I ever remember dying, and then David Von Erich, shortly thereafter. I had, I still got them somewhere, those tribute magazines when those guys passed away. But that's the Mid-Atlantic and Georgia area is what I started watching. And the one thing that I'll tell you that made me fall in love with it was just those guys being larger than life. And to me, that's just what's missing today. It doesn't matter which company you're talking about. I mean, to me, that's just, they've said for years that the people that got over so well, like your Piper, your Hogan, your Flair, The Rock, Stone Cold, it was all Macho Man. It was all them, but with the volume turned way up to 10. And you might be able to start seeing it again now with, however Triple H is running creative, and, hopefully maybe an AEW besides MJF, but they were just them turned up to 10, and it wasn't them coming out there and doing a scripted promo that they didn't really care about, or it wasn't their words. It didn't, it wasn't something they would say as themselves, because, Seth Rollins, just because, they wrote a promo for Seth Rollins doesn't mean that, Colby Lopez is going to say something like that. And I use him as an example, as you first of all off the top of my head, but if you're going to, like back in the day, if they did anything, they would just tell you, they'd give you bullet points to hit. Mention XYZ, or, hey, you got 30 seconds, you got 45 seconds, go out there and talk about what you want to talk about. And that's what got those guys over. And I think that's part of what's missing today, and why the audience is not what it has been in previous decades for any company.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Again, we talk about how things change over time and people have to adapt and kind of go with the newer time. But yeah, no, I kind of agree with back then the larger than life characters, because unfortunately my first remembrance of professional wrestling, again, I was like 6 years old, and it was unfortunately WrestleMania 9 was what I remember. The first thing I remember from pro wrestling, because I just remember seeing someone like a Hulk Hogan and just thought he was like larger than life, and seeing someone like a Yokozuna or Lex Luger, and I'm just like, good Lord, I was like, these guys are just huge, and they are just mean looking but entertaining. And so I guess that's really come in my fondest memory of like that. And then somewhere in the 94, 95, where Eric Bischoff started appearing on WCW, and I started seeing WCW more, because I got into the WWE, but then I started following the WCW, and I'm like, here I am, a 7-8-year-old kid, and just watching pro wrestling on top of watching the early days of ECW when it was Eastern Championship Wrestling, and then became Extreme Championship Wrestling. And so like that's where I got really intrigued with it. And just some of the matches were very entertaining. The stories were there, and just very, for both sides, both Raw for WWF at the time and WCW, because at that time WCW had some interesting characters. I mean, that's when Surfer Sting appeared, was the early 90s in WCW when he was the Surfer Sting.
No, that was late 80s, bro.
Oh, was it 80s?
Yeah, he started in 87 there, and he'd already been around. I think he started in 85.
Wow, then I must have my years all messed up, because I still remember seeing him as Surfer Sting in WCW.
Yeah, no, he started in I want to say 85, and you can look it up, see if I'm right or wrong, but they started off with, it was 4 of them called Power Team USA, and they were putting out pictures, and then I want to say Bill Watts, maybe somebody saw the picture of the 4 of them and called and said, send me those 2, which was the Warrior and Sting.
Yeah.
And so then, of course, they had their little run. Yeah, it was the UWF, because they went into the UWF as the Blade Runners. And then they, the Warrior was just, the Warrior. A lot of people said he had been hard to work with for a long time. He left and Sting stayed. And then Crockett brought the UWF and brought Sting in.
Yeah. So
I want to say he made his debut in Crockett in 87.
Okay. Yeah, I just remember him from the WCW days, because that's the era I grew up in, is the Eric Bischoff ran WCW days, and the WrestleMania 9 and on, and then Eastern Championship Wrestling becoming ECW. I'll give everyone my age. I was born in 87. I just turned 37, so it's like I grew up in that Monday Night War era. Hence my background, but.
Yeah, I was 73. I'll be 51 this year in July. So the territories were going strong.
That was you. Yep, that was the territories was you. Yep.
They were going strong when I was a kid.
And then again, we talk about the sea of change of the territories, and Vince McMahon buying and bringing in all those people from the territories, and then kind of dwindling down to where you just got promotions, which like WWF, WCW, ECW, and all that stuff. And that's the era I remember growing up as a kid, but as I got older and more, into the history of pro wrestling, like even now I'll go back and watch some old videotapes of the 1950s of, all the old school wrestlers back there. And, like Billy Graham and, God, I keep forgetting that one guy's name. The original Nature Boy before Ric Flair was
Buddy Rogers.
Buddy Rogers. Thank you. I couldn't remember it off the top of my head. So I would go back and watch some of those old school matches, and I would go back and watch some of the AWA and, the Mid-South and all that stuff. So, it's unfortunate. Like, it's not unfortunate, but it's fortunate I got to grow up in an era of rival companies kind of being on live TV and actually like competing with one another If anybody hasn't seen part 1 of the documentary about who killed WCW, I mean, people remember WCW was on Saturdays to start off on. And it was actually Ted Turner's idea to look at the guy in charge of television and basically the scheduling, looked at him and goes, hey, we're going to put WCW on Monday night to compete with WWF. So it was actually Ted's idea, as per Eric Bischoff on that show.
Yeah, he said that he Bischoff's thing on that was he said that, you know, he was having his meeting with Ted, and he said that he normally knew what Ted was going to say or what Ted was going to ask. He said, no, that's the one time that Ted really caught him off guard and said, Eric, what do we got to do to compete with WWF? He said, I wasn't prepared for that question. He said, so I looked at him and said, give me prime time. He goes, I didn't think he'd ever put us on prime time. And he said he looked at Scott Saslow and went, give Eric 2 hours each and every Monday night on TNT. And Eric said he went, oh, shit, now what?
Yeah.
And he said he knew he had some work to do. And then, he, you know, that was his thing, that he knew to compete with them, he had to run a live show every Monday night because they were taped.
Yeah, and I think that's and someone had mentioned that in the comments. I think Davis had mentioned that nobody gives credit for them going live weekly, just because, you know, when they started, they were doing shows out of Universal. You know, they were doing the studio show just because, you know, like Eric said, you can recycle a new crowd every single time and get a different feel for the show. And so I thought, you know, growing up and just thinking about that, like, yeah, it's like that crowd looked different every time I saw it on television.
Yeah, see, I'm not sure how long or what year that Turner started, you know, showing Georgia Championship Wrestling. But see, that's kind of why it all, you know, when I say WCW, I say Sting started in WCW in the 80s, was because they just rebranded Crockett, the NWA, to what the show was called. It was NWA's World Championship Wrestling. That was the Saturday night show. And then you had some other, you know, Mid-Atlantic Championship Wrestling coming on Saturday afternoon. You had Worldwide coming on at 11:30 at night after the news, and, you know, so forth and so forth. So WCW to me is just all the 80s kind of to me, before it actually got rebranded and Turner bought it, because that was just the name of that 605 show after Crockett took over from Georgia Championship Wrestling to the Black Saturday era to then Crockett taking it over. So that's kind of where I guess some of the confusion may lie in our timeline. But so,
yeah, no, that's another thing is just it's always like, because growing up you always think, oh, I remember this from childhood, I remember seeing this, but then that's always I guess you can call it the Mandela effect, where you thought you saw this on a program or in a wrestling match, but it never existed, but it was just programmed into your head. Which would be funny. I mean, is there a memory you can think of that you're like, I'm pretty sure that would happen, but it was more like a Mandela effect that's like, oh no, that never existed in pro wrestling?
No, but I will tell you, like I said, I think I've told you this before, I never watched the WWF or the WWF. I didn't care for it. I'd seen bits and pieces here and there, but, you know, they still did the talent exchange, you know, back in the early 80s before Vince went global. And Piper was legitimately hurt after Starrcade 83. He couldn't wrestle because the busted eardrum. His equilibrium was very off. And, you know, Vince, you know, the story is Vince called and said he'd like to use Piper, and they sent him over there. And like I said, you know, when you don't see somebody on TV, but especially as a kid, you don't really think about it a whole lot. And I was flipping through the channels on a Saturday, and I'm pretty sure it was Superstars. It might've been Challenge, but that was their two programs that came on regularly. And as I'm flipping through, he's walking out with Paul Orndorff. And I'm like, oh, that's where you went. All right, I'm going to leave it right here. And that's when I started watching the WWF, and it was because of Roddy Piper.
Yeah, and that's the crazy thing about even during the Monday Night Wars. Like, I know, granted that, you know, I was still a kid and you were in your 20s, you said, before we went live. We were. Yep.
I was in my mid-20s.
Mid-20s during the Monday Night War era, and we were just talking about them, just seeing talent going to different places. Like, you see, you know, Nash and, you know, Hall showing up in WCW. And then
I'll make a good comparison for you now, and correct me. I mean, you know, we might disagree with this, but like, go back, you know, Jericho tried so hard in WCW to do the Goldberg thing. And I mean, he was a mid-carder. He had held the TV title. He'd held the cruiserweight title. I think he might have won the U.S. title. I don't recall, but I know
I think he did. Yeah, I think he won it one time.
Definitely the cruiserweight champion and definitely the TV champion on a few different occasions, trying to do that stuff with Goldberg. Goldberg wanted no part of it. And it got squashed with a spear in the middle of the aisle during an interview. And then he goes to WWE and they make him look like a superstar immediately. He comes out, he interrupts The Rock. He goes back and forth with The Rock. And to me, that happened again to me with Ethan Page. He was a kind of a mid-carder, kind of floundering. Didn't really know what AEW wanted to do with him. Were they going to put him in a tag team? Was he going to be with the Hardys? Was he going to do this? Was he going to do that? And they bring him into NXT and make out like, he's a superstar. Put him right. His first match is going to be for the NXT title this Sunday night. And so you're seeing, stuff can still work. You just got to do it.
Yeah, I think that's another thing is when you compare our childhood to what we see now about just programs and where individuals are, it's astonishing to think that that's what it was like back then as kids. But now you're adults, you're like, wow, I feel like I've seen this before as a child, but they're doing it a little better now and making the crowd more invested as it was there, where it was more of shock value of guys switching promotions from WCW to WWE and vice versa. And so I think another aspect of that, and I'm going to bring it up because it's a good topic, is when, Alundra Blaze went over to WCW, tossed the title in the garbage, and became Medusa. We never talk about trailblazing women in professional wrestling because, again, we mentioned in a previous show, they were more seen as like a special attraction on the card when pro wrestling shows came to town. But as children, like kids, do you remember a fondest memory of seeing women professional wrestlers for like the first time? And you said, what is this? I didn't know women can do this.
No, I mean, they every once in a while, the NWA, they would bring in the women's champion, and it wasn't Moolah. It would be some kind of, they wouldn't be called the world champion per se, but whatever title they would say they had. And, the ones I remember, like Ani Kai, of course, Moolah, Wendy Richter. But, you talk about Alundra Blaze, and that's the one thing about today's wrestling that I do like versus yesteryear, was because when Vince would bring these guys in, he pretended like they never existed anywhere else. And it drove me batshit crazy. Roddy Piper, thank God, was, got to keep his name, and a lot of the earlier ones right around that era. But, after the Hulk Hogan, feed him giant after giant after giant, Rockin' Robin. Yeah, that's another one I remember.
That's another one. Yeah.
He was Sam Houston and Jake Roberts' sister, if I remember.
Sister, yep.
But, they would bring these guys in, like, Big Bubba, for example. I'd been sitting there watching him wrestle Dusty Rhodes for 3 years and be Cornette and the Midnight Express's bodyguard. And he comes in as a big boss man like he'd never wrestled before. And it's like, come on, are you serious? They bring Dusty in. I mean, I know he was toward the tail end of his career, but they bring him in and, he rocked the polka dots. I mean, I'll give it to Dusty. Dusty could, he could turn chicken shit into chicken salad, make it work and still get over. And, so that's the one thing that, they recognize that these women and men have, they've wrestled before in other places. But back to Alundra Blaze, what got me started on it was, we've talked about this in other episodes before, but she was Medusa Michelli. That's who I knew her as. And VK Wall Street.
VK Wall Street, yeah.
Awful. But her and Sherry Martel beat the dog shit out of each other on AWA TV for a long time. And then Sherry came in, they brought her, they never really used her as a wrestler, and she could go. And they brought Medusa in and turned her into Alundra Blaze. And I'm like, really? Okay. But so that's the one thing about yesteryears that I really didn't like. But other than that, and I'll give you an example. We were talking about Swerve earlier being used the way that I don't like the way he's being used on TV. And it goes back to what used to work then to a point can still work now. How many times did MJF actually wrestle on TV as the world champion?
True, not very often.
And if you go back when I grew up, or even in the, to that era, I know they started putting more title matches on in that Monday Night War era, but if you go back, if Flair would have wrestled on TV every week, or Hogan would have wrestled on TV every week, it would have killed him. you know, and I know they were still trying to get people in the seats, but I mean, yeah, they still wrestled the house shows, you know, and Hogan would get a clean win over the Boss Man or One Man Gang, you know, every night in a different town. And Flair would, you know, lose by DQ or be a dusty finish. And somebody think that they've seen the world title change hands, but it really didn't, you know, but that's what got the asses in the seats. And, you know, they'd come out there and talk for a little bit, but, you know, just because we're not doing it that way with the house shows per se, you still want, especially like, you know, AEW doesn't have the Peacock deal like WWE does. So they want people to buy those pay-per-views, whether it's from the cable company or Bleacher Report or all these other different apps. And if you're going to have Swerve wrestling on TV every week, it takes Swerve out of the equation. Whoever's holding that title, why are they going to want to see the pay-per-view? And I get AEW normally does pay-per-views very well, other than they could run a little long sometimes and put a couple of matches on there that don't really need to be there. But, you know, for the most part, their pay-per-views are pretty good. And, you know, but again, why are you going to want to see Swerve defend the title when you've watched it for 3 weeks in a row with different people? And it looked like Nick Wayne was about to beat him with, you know, his version of the cutter off the top rope, or, you know, Roderick Strong's getting 2.5 counts on him and so forth. But like I said, you go back and you look at today, take yesteryear out of the equation, you know, and MJF to me was the most over champion they've had. And I know he wrestled on TV a couple of times, but as champion, I'm not sure if he did more than once.
Yeah, he had a few matches. I think he's had 2 matches on TV that went a time limit. But for the most part, he would always defend his title at a pay-per-view. And I think that's the mystique of what we lost even in the yesteryear. I mean, obviously during that Monday Night War time between, you know, 1997 and 2000, they had a lot more title matches on TV. I mean, heck, you can count how many times Triple H would defend his title on TV on one hand. For the other time, he was still a champion and just wrestling on TV against someone else's non-title match. You know, you still featured your world champion on there to wrestle a non-title match. And I think that's a thing with AEW. They keep adding into this whole, well, we're going to have a AEW title eliminator match, or we are going to have a title match on TV. And for us, it was more exciting back in the day knowing, wow, we didn't know this title match was going to happen. They just announced at the beginning of the show. Like, you're going to put the title on the line tonight. And so for us, that was exciting. When it's pre-announced now, I feel like it loses its aura. And it's just like, I want to be excited. I just want to see like random be like, all right, title's defended tonight. Beginning of the show saying, hey, if you're going to be this way, you can defend your title tonight. You know, and we see it on Raw sometimes. We see it on WWE sometimes still, where they're like, I'll put the title on the line tonight too. You know, and it's like, I get it. You want to keep your champion kind of in the now and keep them on the screen and have more exciting stuff, but you're taking away from builds for pay-per-views. Whereas back in the day, like the builds for the pay-per-views were very exciting for us, where everything was you know, planned out almost like they just mentioned that Sting and Hogan match at Starrcade was 18 months planned. Vince McMahon and maybe even, you know, Triple H today have plans a year or so in advance of pay-per-views, you know, or WrestleManias. So, but back then, like, we didn't know that. We were just excited for the build. You know, now that it's peeled back a little bit, it kind of takes away the aura we felt when we were kids.
And you know, I don't want to seem like I'm just picking on AEW. I think they've done a bad job on Raw with Damian Priest.
Yeah.
That title does not seem as prestigious as it did when Seth Rollins held it. So like I said, I don't want to feel like I'm just picking on them, but again, so there's just, you even go back to the days that I'm talking about, and you would see the Intercontinental Champion or United States Champion wrestle on TV, but it was very rare that the title was on the line. It was normally against, you know, a jobber that, you know, Magnum TA would belly to belly in 15 seconds and then go talk about Flair and Nikita, whoever he was feuding with at the time, and stuff to that nature. Like, so
that was still when he was the U.S. champion too, wasn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And so you go out there and, you know, and like a lot of times if you saw championship matches on TV, like when they did, when Nikita and Magnum did the best out of 7, I think they put one of them on live TV, but then the rest of them were on, you know, house shows. But they would televise them. They taped them and televised them so people could actually see, because Nikita went up 3-0 and then Magnum come back and won the next 3, and then Nikita won the 7th one. And that was right before Magnum's accident, because they were setting Magnum up to go after Flair and win the world title.
Mm-hmm.
And then, of course, they were going to revisit and have, at least one more match with him and Nikita where he went over as the world champion. But, history would tell us that didn't happen due to his accident. And, he seems happy in life, glad he survived it. That was pretty rough back then. But like I said, you go back and like, so those champions and stuff, the world tag team champions would, very rarely wrestle anybody high profile on that. You might get a mid card team they would wrestle, but you talk about WCW in your era and versus like, so what became WCW. And like I said, that's why I was so loyal to the brand, because it was awful in the early 90s after Turner bought it and everybody kind of saw how things were running. Tully and Arn left, and then Dusty left, Flair left, and Wyndham had left, and just all these different people, and they're bringing in tag teams like the Ding Dongs because Jim Herd thought they were entertaining. And I mean, WCW in the early 90s was just, before Bischoff took over and started, was just god awful. And then at the end of it, it was pretty bad. But it was still what I grew up on, and it was I could sit there and WWF was having much better main events and much more entertaining program at the end of WCW's run. But it was still my brand. Flair was still there. Some of the other guys were still there. And it's like, do better. But
yeah, I think I was the same way. I think, like we talked about, like just the characters in WCW early were before, Bischoff kind of like took over as producer and was like, let's change some stuff up. I need to make this work. I need to make this work. Just some of the stuff back then was just so bad. I mean, the character Oz that Kevin Nash played was just terrible in the early days. And, it was almost like the characters in WWF at that time were more exciting and more off like a comic book page than some of the characters WCW had in their early days. And again, when Bischoff took over and he kind of changed the whole perspective of it, of let's get this audience, because again, he ran it like it was as a live TV show. That's all he knew was live TV. And he wanted to do something different. And over the course of, changing it all up and, obviously the whole, mid 90s to 96, 97, where, you bring in Hogan after he had left WWF for the steroid stuff and he had a falling out with Vince. And, it is crazy to think the story behind that. As a kid, you're seeing it as, oh, well, okay, well, Hogan's out for a while and now he's in WCW. I never expect him to join the rival, and now he's a villain. And so, nowadays it's almost like the audience could kind of see that coming of reading characters today and where wrestlers are going to go, if that makes sense.
It does. When they brought Hogan in 94, and I was just like, oh, dear God. Because I just, like I said, I even watching WWF, you see these guys go out there and just half kill him, and then they hit their finish on him, and he kicks out, shakes, foot, leg drop, 1, 2, 3, it's over. Mm-hmm. And it's like, even as a kid, meeting those people backstage the way I did, you learn real quick meeting them that it was a show, whether they would admit it or not. But, but I'm like, dear God, at least make it look a little bit real, please. And as soon as they brought Hogan in, who else was it there for him to wrestle but Flair? And, I knew he was going to win the title, but I just, even back then, I was 94, so I was 21, and he beats Flair the first time for the title. And I just shook my head, not because I didn't think he was going to win the title, or not because of business. I didn't think they should put it on him, but it was like, you don't have anybody else for him to wrestle. And I'm not saying he should have laid down for Flair in that first match, but a DQ finish or some kind of finish that left the title on Flair, but looked like he got his ass kicked like normal. That's what worked in that territory. And, then you set it up for a month or two down the road, then Hogan actually takes the title then. But to me, setting it up for Hogan to take the title on the first night not only squashes the guy that's carried your company the past 15 years, but, where, again, then what? I mean, where do you go from there? Because it was one of my biggest gripes with AEW is when they go out there and they put two top guys against each other. I don't mind a win or a loss for anybody, but it's when they go out there and they do this on TV. All pay-per-views is where the flat needs to come in my opinion, because that way after the pay-per-view match you can move on. But these TV matches where you let two mid to upper level stars, whether it be male or female, and they just beat them flat with their finish, you then what? Look what you've done to them. I mean, Wardlow's a prime example. I mean, how many times can we beat this guy flat? They let him squash their biggest star. He squashed MJF in that match, and they haven't done nothing with him since. And so, my critiques have gone back a long way. It's not just, excuse me, not just, on AEW. That just happens to be what we're talking about now.
Yeah, and I think we can say the same for a couple of people in WWE. Again, it goes back to, we're not just critiquing AEW. As wrestling fans, we're allowed to critique everything. And, I mean, it's the same spectrum of WWE with someone like a Finn Balor, who at one point was the first ever Universal Champion, hurt himself, and then, had a couple of good runs here and there. But now it's almost like he's a shell of himself, where he hasn't picked up a win in a while. And he's just kind of in the background with Judgment Day and Damian Priest being the world champion. I'm hoping they're building something towards a feud between those two for the title, because someone like a Finn Balor, I think, would do so well with a title on him again. A very talented guy, but then again, you're wasting him as a second fiddle in Judgment Day. He's basically second in command there, and he's second fiddle behind Damian Priest. Like you said, who hasn't done anything to make that world title prestigious. Obviously, I don't know what they're gearing up for, whether he retains against Drew because of a CM Punk interference and loses the title to Finn at SummerSlam.
Yeah, as much as I want to say Drew, deserves that title with the work he's doing to further that CM Punk feud, because they're going to be, if they were anywhere other than Scotland, I'd say no, he don't need to win it. Let CM Punk interfere. But this will be 2 years in a row he's going to get screwed in Scotland. So.
Right, but I mean, it is WWE, and you never know what they can pull out. We everybody had assumed that, at WrestleMania, that Stone Cold was going to come out during that Cody Rhodes Roman Reigns title match to face The Rock, and it ended up being The Undertaker, which nobody saw coming.
Well, from what I read, that's what they wanted, but they couldn't come to a financial agreement for him to show up.
And that's what I'm saying, is that something could occur to where they can change course. Where, hey, we maybe were going to put the title on Drew at Clash of the Castle this year, give him a Scotland win. But what if we continue Damian Priest as champion to where, like, a story-wise, have Finn Balor win Money in the Bank? And, Damian convincing him to, hey, just, forfeit the briefcase, you'll get a chance, blah, 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 to where he says, I'm cashing in at SummerSlam and we're going to wrestle for the title. There's a story right there, but what they're doing with Finn, I'm a big Finn Balor fan.
Oh, I love Finn Balor.
I've always loved Finn Balor, even when, he was Prince Devitt. I love the character. I love the guy. He can wrestle in a ring, and what they're doing with them, kind of like what we were saying with Wardlow, he beats one of the top guys and they've done nothing with them.
Yeah, I think one of my most disappointing matches to watch over the years was that Finn Balor Edge match at WrestleMania with the Demon, because Finn getting busted open and them having to stop the match and staple his head. It's just like I expected like an all-time classic that we'd be talking about in 10 years from those two guys, and it was just kind of like, eh.
Exactly. And I feel like as kids we were spoiled with some of the matches we got, even though there were some matches where you're like, oh God, that was just not as good as I thought it would be. Example, Starrcade 97. That match with the weird finish with Bret Hart coming out. Like, I don't think anyone liked that. I didn't like it. I, as a fan, I'm like, dude, come on. I was like, I don't like that finish. Like,
they ruined an 18-month build with that.
18-month build with that. I'm just like, ridiculous. Like, so yeah, I think as today, it's almost like the audience is more keen to know what's going on with characters, as in when we were growing up, we didn't know what was next, after, a Nitro or Monday Night Raw, or, an ECW, And so I think today we're just, I think we're spoiled with the product that we get, where everything's like almost like planned out, and the fans are now smarter that can see what's coming next, even though they don't want to admit that they see what's coming next.
Yeah, and there's a lot of stuff. I'm kind of jump back around here, but like some of the stuff they did in the '90s, like during the Attitude Era, when it was kind of the end of the characters and the beginning of the Attitude Era, and they saw it wasn't working. Was, for example, they brought in Tony Anthony, the Dirty White Boy, made him a plumber, D.L.
Yeah.
Hopper. And I'm just like, what? He was, former champion in different territories. They brought in Bill Irwin, who I'd watched be champion in world class and have great matches in world class. Brought him in as a hockey player. They brought in Tracy Smothers as somebody, and I've been watching Tracy Smothers have knockdown, drag out bloodbaths for years. And, so that was the kind of stuff that when Vince would do that kind of crap, I kept me kind of sane to WCW or NWA, whatever it happened to be at the time, because of so much stuff like that he pulled.
Yeah, it was. I mean, Chris Candido is another one.
Oh yeah, another great example.
Another talented guy from another promotion comes over to WWE and just gets, repackaged, and it's a waste. And so I think that's the weird thing about now today's crowd. Like, I think that's the nice thing about AEW. I will give them that, is that they will bring wrestlers in, but not change characters or anything like that. And I think another good thing WWE is doing and Triple H is doing is undoing everything that, Vince had done about renaming these wrestlers and reverting them back. I mean, we just saw Butch revert back to Pete Dunne.
Well, I'll tell you one thing I was pleasantly pleased with was when they brought Shawn Spears back. They didn't revert him back to Ty Dillinger.
Exactly. They said that's Shawn Spears. And I think that's what's more soothing to us as wrestling fans, where we're like, we want the actual, like the person that we know, not this character that we are like, oh, well, like you had said, like someone we saw in another promotion that was very talented, and then they come over here and they're made a joke of. I think that's why I feel like today, I think we're spoiled, because we're getting that kind of talent where we're like, yeah, this guy wrestled here. We acknowledge that. And so he's with us now.
And I'll tell you too, I think MJF made the right decision to re-sign with AEW. WWE is so top heavy in main event talent right now. Now, Jade Cargill, I will tell you, the first time I saw her come out, I'm like, oh, that she's got WWE written all over her. Mm-hmm. Not because she's that great. It's, no, Jade's, I think she's getting better, but her look, her presentation, to me, that just screamed WWE. Whether Vince is right and Triple H is right, doesn't matter. Just their presentation, the kind of people they like, male or female, she screamed WWE to me. MJF, I think he's better off in AEW because he gets that creative freedom to go out there, cuss when he wants, do what he wants. And, they're WWE's not going to give him that freedom. And if they brought him in, I mean, I know they want him. I know they wanted him, but they're not going to bring him in and immediately put him over top of a Roman, a Seth, a Cody, a Drew, a CM Punk. I mean, they're going to have to get that audience familiar with him and let him move up the ranks in their company. So I think for what he wants, and, he seems like he probably really is an egotistical guy to a point. I think he's, better off where he's at.
I think he's also more happy to where he's being. I mean, you kind of see that in a lot of wrestlers where they're happy where they're at because they're given an opportunity. Or, when we were, you can tell when we were growing up which wrestlers, seemed like they were really into their matches and just was very enthusiastic to get on camera and doing promos. Now you're just like, I can tell this wrestler just doesn't want to be here, just the way they deliver their promo. It's half-ass, or they're not giving it 100%. They're struggling through it. They're just like, I just don't want to be here anymore. I'm not happy.
Yeah, to me, I think it's very blatantly obvious that Buddy Matthews and Malachi Black want to go back to WWE.
Yeah.
I think it's just blatantly obvious that they want to go back. They're two that comes to mind off the top of my head.
I mean, that's also the thing about being with significant others. I mean, that's the hard part when you're on the road a lot and for two different companies and you've got different schedules. I mean, how often can you see your significant other? And I think, even though the schedule is more of a heavy load in WWE, I do believe Buddy and Malachi want to go back just so they can be close to, work with their significant others and be in that company with them, to the eventual, like, hey, we're all done. We can settle down and we're already here. And so it's just that life cycle of a wrestler moving around in a company to where you could tell they're unhappy or you could tell they're happy. And with someone like an MJF, I think he's happy to be in AEW because I feel like he knows he would get lost in the shuffle in WWE with the way that their roster is. Not only in the main roster, but NXT has got stuff going on to where they're like, all right, how do we implement MJF into NXT? Because they just brought in Ethan Page. And now they're doing the crossover with TNA with Jordynne Grace against Roxanne Perez. So they've got a lot of stuff going on in NXT. They've got to try to figure out how they would integrate that. So I think at all parties aside, I do believe MJF, I'm with you, did make the right choice by staying with AEW.
Yeah, I read an interesting story somewhere the other day. It was after NXT, but that TNA had nothing scheduled after like the August 13th or something like that. And it's heavily rumored that they might be become part of the TKO umbrella.
I mean, I wouldn't be surprised. I mean, if Anthem can't really do anything with them, then I wouldn't be surprised if Anthem sells their stock of TNA to TKO.
So I mean, I like what they're doing. I mean, they made Jordynne Grace look really strong on on NXT Tuesday night. Mm-hmm. I'm not sure what's going to happen with the title match. I'll watch it Sunday and see what my opinion is after her and Roxanne Perez go at it. I would love to see them let her beat Roxanne Perez, because if you sit there and look at them side by side, there's no reason in the world Roxanne Perez should beat Jordynne Grace. That's just my opinion. But you talk about people being happy or where they are and hesitant to go. When Flair finally broke down and went to the WWF in '92, he said when he called Vince and told him he was coming, he said, Vince said, yeah, right. He goes, no, I'm coming. I got the belt. He goes, send me the belt and I'll believe it when I get the belt. Because he had told him so many different times that he was going to come, and then they would talk, whether it was Turner or Crockett, somebody would talk him into staying. And so he's sending the belt, but you could tell. I mean, it wasn't his thing. I mean, they said a couple of the reasons that they changed that WrestleMania 8 main event was because they did Hogan Flair at a lot of house shows, and the crowd didn't seem to get into it. The matches didn't go the way they wanted them to, and so they said, all right, we got to pivot here. Even though that your hardcore wrestling fan wanted to see Hogan versus Flair. And, in hindsight of history, they missed the boat of being the ones to put that on pay-per-view. You could just tell he wasn't the same person in WWE as he was back in the NWA/WCW. So.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. I think you can tell that on a lot of runs. I mean, obviously we saw it on the documentary that, at the end that, Nash and Hall weren't happy in WWE anymore, and they saw what WCW was doing with Eric Bischoff in charge, and they said, yeah, we're not happy here. We're going to move to WCW, see what happens there, because that seems like it'll be a lot easier. We get a lot more freedom and all that. I mean, which led to the curtain call, and then even someone like, even someone that, made that might have felt unhappy or just like, I wouldn't say like out of water in WWF. I mean, we can go back out of that curtain call and just say Triple H got the rough end of the stick. Shawn Michaels was a made man and Triple H was the one that had to get punished, and he went through it. There could have been times when he's like, nah, I'm out. Like, I'm done too. Well, you could have thought that he might have been like, okay, I get it. I'm getting punished here and I'm over it, but he stuck it through.
Yeah, he did. I've heard Bruce Pritchard talk about that time. He said that, I don't know if he said it was him or if he said it was Vince or both of them that pulled him aside and said, those two are gone. Shawn's a champion. He's kind of untouchable right now. We got to do something. So you're going to eat shit and have to like it for a little while. And he said, they're like, just muster through it and we'll get you back to that spot. Because he was the one, he was supposed to win King of the Ring that year that Austin won it. Mm-hmm. He wanted the winning a couple of years later, but without that curtain call, we might not have got Austin 316. I mean, things happen for a reason.
Yeah. Here's a quick question. Maybe you can answer it. I can't remember it all. Connor in the comments. Connor, how's it going, buddy? Did NWA bring back the territories?
Well, I'm in what context?
Maybe now. I don't know. I don't know. I know NWA is trying to work on something right now, but
yeah, I think I've heard something about Billy Corgan saying he wanted to try to do that, but it's, I mean, there's so much wrestling out there right now. It's like, focus on what you got, bro. I mean, I think that's why he's got EC3 going around to, OVW in different places. I think they're trying to recreate that magic that once was the territories, but without, without TV, without strong TV, it's a, a lost cause in my opinion. I mean, without, like I said, back when, when I grew up, the way this stuff went off, and we've talked about it before, that soap opera mentality of, it goes off with, whatever's happening, so whoever's getting beat up, and, David Crockett screaming, fans, we got to go, we're out of time. And, stuff like that. But as Ric Flair's getting beat up by Magnum TA in the ring, or, the Road Warriors were, heel and wrestling a jobber team, but Sting and Dusty hit the ring because of the attacks. I mean, over the annals of history and stuff like that. So, that's kind of what, not only did it make you tune in next week, but when they came to your area, that's what made you want to go. And, I think that's definitely what we're missing now. In my opinion, like I said, I pick on AEW a lot because of I think their show always doesn't matter what show you're watching. It just always goes off flat to me. It's like, okay, it's on again next week. Maybe I'll watch it. Maybe I won't. I'm going to change my plans to make sure I watch it. WWE, does the same stuff. I mean, it's just kind of, it's today's wrestling. And I mean, to me right now, the best thing I think WWE has going is Chad Gable.
Yeah.
And his contract's coming up. I mean, I love the work Gable's doing. I love the work Drew is doing. I really like Swerve. I think they have dropped the ball on Swerve. That's why I'm griping so much about his title run. I mean, like I said, MJF proved that you can be champion and not have to wrestle on TV every week to get over.
Yeah.
And they're just, so.
No, and I totally agree with you there. I think right now with territories, it's very hard to kind of bring that kind of back, especially with multimedia stuff going on right now. I mean, hell, we can even go to the birth of the internet and the overall development of it and the growth of it. I mean, that's how OVW broadcasts his shows now, is on YouTube. I mean, that's how I watch some of the OVW shows, is on YouTube. I watch it sometimes there. And, it's amazing that TV deals should be the new thing, but I mean, nobody watches TV, so then it goes to streaming services. And then, again, like I said, now, like the internet, like a YouTube, or, can't even think, Daily Motion shows stuff too. And so I think the days of basic TV and trying to bring back like that feel of it, I mean, I don't think we're ever going to see that ever again, because I just feel like basic cable, or just cable in general, has gone down, and you've got like streaming, or some people still use Dish, which is surprising to me that people still stream TV on Dish Network.
Well, I think OVW was probably the last territory to have an actual show. When Jim Cornette and Danny Davis were running it together, as part of the WWE developmental, they still, before that even happened, they had a show on, local cable in Louisville, and came on. I forgot what day it came on, but they were running it that way. Smoky Mountain before that, they had a local TV deal in the areas. I mean, I guess it's possible if you wanted to try to incorporate, like, Maryland Championship Wrestling's still around, and I'm sure they're just close. So I know I know that Memphis Wrestling's back on doing something, and I mean, if you wanted, to go to all those different little territories and try to have a working relationship, and whether it's EC3 or whoever come in as the world champion, I mean, and try to make it work with a streaming show, or, something on there, NWA in the territories, however you want to word it, and everybody gets a piece of the pie, and maybe try to do something with it. It's possible if you get enough, steam behind it, but with two big conglomerates with, TKO and then the money that the Khans have, I mean, you're fighting a very uphill battle.
Yeah, I think that's what it is. It's very hard for these smaller, promotions to kind of get that TV and streaming deal when you don't have the big time money like an AEW or WWE, or, I mean, heck, TNA has some money, and they got Anthem running it, but if they become under the umbrella of TKO, they'll maybe make some money and maybe get some shows, or they may get actually kind of eaten up and kind of merge with WWE to become this super wrestling promotion. But then again, you have to think how many of those TNA stars want to stay, and feel like the old days of when WCW was bought by WWE, and all those guys were like, nah, I don't want to sign with WWE, and I'm just going to take my check and I'm going to go. Someone like a Sting who didn't come over, or someone like a Goldberg who waited years to even debut for WWE because he wasn't sure. So it's always that thought process of, if TNA does get sold to a TKO and become the merger with UFC, WWE, and kind of becomes this conglomerate joint programming with WWE, what happens to that roster? So,
well, I mean, you kind of nailed it on the head. I think they would do the same thing they did with WCW. There's going to be, I think they would want Moose. They want Jordan Grace, maybe Sami Callihan. I'd have to go out and look at their roster.
Josh Alexander would be one now that Ethan's over at WWE.
Yeah, I'd have to look at their roster from top to bottom, and to give you an answer on just about everybody. I mean, you don't know what kind of contract Nick Nemeth has with them. But it's funny. People bring up they Eric Bischoff gets blamed for the guaranteed contracts and stuff. You were talking about Kevin Nash and Scott Hall. Nash has said it on multiple occasions. He's like, I could have made more money in my spot in WWE by staying. He said, but that was working 300 plus days a year. He goes, I actually took less money. He goes, but it was guaranteed for 150 dates. He goes, a lot of people didn't want to be at home. He brought up Flair. He goes, Rick didn't like being at home. He goes, I like being at home. I love my wife. I love my kids. I wanted to be at home more. He goes, that's why I went to WCW. He goes, I could have made more in WWE working for it on the spot and part of the card I was on. He goes, it wasn't guaranteed, but I knew what I was making. He goes, but I took the guaranteed less money and less dates. And it was, a lot easier on my body as well. Scott did the same thing.
Yeah, I mean, and that's amazing that the heat that AEW gets, and I'm going to say it's heat or some shade. I mean, obviously from Triple H, when he said, someone that doesn't enjoy the grind. Well, I mean, he also doesn't know the life of someone like a Will Ospreay who said, bro, like I like this schedule better. It's lighter on my body and all that stuff. I don't have to work these 330 days a year or 325 days. How many of you work a year and all that stuff. And back then, like, those guys were on the road 24/7. And it's amazing how you saw them. And that kind of leads me to the next thing. Like the question is, guys from the time you growing up, like, which one surprised you the most? That's still, I wouldn't say like a lot, but still like kicking and still like in good health, like from when you were growing up. Like I can name one, and that's, even though he's older, we were just talking about him, Kevin Nash. I mean, still looks monstrous for how old he is. Watching him growing up.
I think the one that surprises me the most is still alive is Flair.
Yeah, that's another one. Yeah,
I mean, don't get me wrong. He's not in the shape of a Kevin Nash, but I mean, he's not, he's not fat and out of shape, and he still posts workout videos on Instagram and other things. But the fact of how much that man has drank over the years, you've never heard Flair being one that did drugs, like Piper. He liked his cocaine back in the day, and he flat out admitted it. It's he kind of predicted his own fate. Like after he turned 60, he had done an interview and said he never thought he'd make it to 60 because of the life he had led. He goes, but I don't think I'll make it to 65. And he didn't. And, it was heart issues, but out of all of them, Flair still being alive, especially after everything he's been through, the surgeries and all with the colostomy bag, downright just amazes me. But you talk about the schedule versus then versus now. I don't think they couldn't do that schedule these days. And it's not because these guys aren't better athletes or in the gym, but you go back and, a Dusty Flair match, unless you couldn't, without knowing the story, you couldn't go back and watch. You couldn't get a 15-year-old wrestling fan to go back and watch one of those and enjoy it. Mm-hmm. Same with, they might enjoy a Midnight Rock and Roll match, maybe, but without knowing the story that's there. But, those guys, they did the rest holds. They walked around the outside of the ring. They weren't doing, the suicide dives. They weren't coming off ladders. They weren't doing all the stuff we see today. And I'm Jeff Hardy. I mean, I'm well, between his DUIs and his drug abuse and what he's put his body through in the ring as well. He's another one that, how much longer is he going to be around? When's he going to have his next relapse? God willing, hopefully he doesn't. But, between how, they used to say Scott Steiner, like in his TNA days, and I forgot who said it. They're like, to see him get out of the car, it amazed them he could actually still go in the ring because he'd get out of the car with a cane and moving like an 80-year-old woman. And they said, but he, once he put them tights on and his music hit, he was moving normal. And so, like I said, they couldn't do them 300 plus days a year with today's product. The way they wrestle now with the high spots and, everything they do to each other.
Yeah, and I agree. And I mean, you could have named so many more that had issues. I mean, someone like a Perry Saturn who had traumatic brain injuries in his career, still walking around today, even though it's a little slower for him. Someone like a Diamond Dallas Page who turned his life around with the yoga and actually got healthy. Seeing him still around, it's amazing. You see some of these guys. I'll even say someone like a Vampiro, like that just amazes me. That
he actually looks pretty good these days.
He actually looks really. It looks like he lost a little bit of weight too. And it's like, it's surprising to see someone like that from the day going, wow, this guy's still kicking it and still actually look like he's kind of healthy. But yeah, no, it's just amazing to see someone like a Ric Flair again, just still kicking it when honestly, a lot of his friends are not around anymore. I mean, obviously he still got friends and, Ricky Steamboat that's still around, Lex Luger, but again, how long do those guys have last? So it's like us fans that grew up with those guys, like, that's the last hold we have on our childhood wrestling is those guys. And now, it's passing along to this new generation that we're trying to get behind and trying to support.
Yeah. And like I said, I just, I think one thing that the luster has lost for me, and, I mean, Seth has the ability to go down as one of the all-time greats, but there's Drew, CM Punk, but to me, and he's still young enough, and because of his gusto, and he seems like he has passion for it, but I don't see anybody from any roster today, except for maybe MJF, depending on how his career folds out, reaching the iconic status that a Piper, a Hogan, a Flair, The Rock, Stone Cold, they're just those people that drew you in. And it's like, and another reason I don't think they could do the 300 days a year again. It's like, so you might not have seen Hogan on TV, but he was wrestling somewhere every night. Flair the same way. Now, Flair was jumping territory to territory as the traveling NWA champion, so it was a little different in that aspect. Flair might be in Memphis one night, Texas the next, and then Japan for a week, and then back in Florida to California, traveling as that champion. And Hogan was just on the road with the WWF. But they were running 3 shows, back in the 80s. The main event on one would be Hogan. Main event on the next one would be, the Intercontinental title. Then the tag titles would be the main event on wherever they were. On what they called it, the A, B, and C shows. Hogan A, whoever Intercontinental champion was, B, tag champion C. And everybody was hoping they'd be on Hogan's card because they were going to draw more money. Mm-hmm. But you go back then, and it wasn't so much the company that was drawing money. It was that the people wanted, I got to go see WWE, because that's what they say now. But they were going, hey, Hogan's wrestling the one-man gang tonight. Did you see what he did to him on TV? How he jumped him on Piper's Pit, or whatever. You get my point. It's like, man, Dusty's wrestling Flair at in Martinsville tonight. Did you see the Horseman beat up Dusty last week? He's gonna get his tonight. It wasn't about the NWA or WCW. It was about the people you were invested in. And I don't care what company it is, but there's people I like, there's people I don't. I'm not invested in anybody these days, and that kind of sucks for me.
Yeah, and that's kind of as we're winding down here, I guess that's kind of going to be my final question. I know you mentioned one name already with MJF, but we reminisce about the guys that we grew up on that aren't doing it anymore, and we got this new generation of talent, and like you said, depending on his trajectory of his career, MJF could go down as someone like a Piper or Hogan. And, other than that, I mean, could you see maybe one or two other names right now in this generation where when we were kids, the kids now watching this going, oh yeah, I remember that guy from my childhood.
I think you're going to see some people remember, again, Seth Rollins for the matches he's had, and Seth, his outlandish costumes he went into, and he does get kind of into his interviews. And I think you've seen it more since Vince has been gone. I think Triple H has given him more freedom. Cody, Cody's made a big impact. Roman, but the pop that Roman's going to get when he comes back is going to be flipping massive. And I hope to God that they do it the way they did when The Rock came back the first time and nobody expected it. I want them to be out there running their mouth with the new bloodline or whatever, and then Roman's music just hit out of nowhere and nobody knows that he was going to be there. And then you can advertise him for the following week. But I'll tell you, that's one thing that drives me crazy nowadays is with the run-ins. Like they hit somebody's music for a run-in. It's like, all right, we know it's scripted, but come on, man. You can hit their music after they run in and clear the ring and are checking on the, whoever they saved. Then you can hit their music. You don't have to hit, they don't need entrance music to do a run-in in the middle of a match. It drives me nuts. But, one of the things I think that's also missing, and it's not just, I don't want to say it's missing because people take things too far, but like now, Bianca had posted the other day, and I love Bianca Belair. She's one I really do like. And I told you before, I think Rhea Ripley's got Hollywood written all over at some point. I don't think we're going to have her much longer. But Bianca had posted, hey, I love you guys, but, following me to my car and to my hotel is kind of creepy. Don't do that. She was very classy about it. And I mean, everything I've seen of her and Montez Ford, they seem like, church-going people and, very, very laid-back, nice individuals. But then you see they got to deal with that kind of stuff. And it's like, ugh, but I'll tell you a funny story from back when I was a kid. I always went to the Fieldale Collinsville High School gym, and I got to meet a lot of them because my dad played music. We've talked about this before, and the deputies took turns working the dance, and he worked that every Saturday night. So when we went to the matches, we knew all the deputies, and I got to go backstage. I'm going to share some of these here with you in a minute on who I got, but the Briscoes had turned heel. Jack and Jerry, not Jay and Mark.
Mark, no, yeah, Jay, yeah. I know which Briscoe.
The first Briscoes.
The first Briscoe brothers, yes.
But and both them were, they were legit. They were both amateur wrestlers, and they, especially Jack. They said you did not want to mess with Jack Briscoe, but they were feuding with Ricky Steamboat and Jay Youngblood, and they had beat him up real bad on TV. And I was a kid, so not as an adult now. Of course, I would not do this, but I was 5, 6 years old, somewhere around there. And I don't know if it's in this book or not. It might be, but somebody had flattened all 4 of their tires, and we went out to leave. And here I go trotting over there to, hey, can I have your autograph? And, it's one of those things from being a kid, you don't forget. My mom's like, Jason, they're busy. Come on. And Jerry Briscoe, God bless him, looked at her. He goes, ma'am, he's fine. I ain't like we're going anywhere no time soon. And she was like, you sure? And he's like, yeah, he's fine. I think I'd showed you the picture I had with the Iron Sheik when I was a kid. And
yes,
he kind of looked around when we asked him, hey, can you take a picture with me? And he kind of looked around to make sure nobody was watching. He put his arm around me. Hurry up. But that was it. That was all there. And, like I said, my Roddy Piper, when I got to meet him, I was petrified when I first went back there because it was him and Gene Anderson and Mr. Fuji and not Stan Hansen, but Swede Hansen, who was back there pressing weights, and it scared the dog shit out of me. I took off and ran back to my mom. And, one of the deputies we knew, who was a big guy in his own right, Doc was about 6'4". And he come down and looked at me, damn it, boy, you want to do this or not? I don't have time for this. Yes, sir. So I went back, and then Piper was just like, so he was U.S. champion and feuding. Somebody asked about Wahoo McDaniel and feuding with Wahoo at the time, and was the biggest asshole on TV you could possibly imagine. And this was before his WWF days. So, before he kicks Cindy Lauper in the head. But he was the biggest asshole on Mid-Atlantic TV, and he was such a nice guy. I mean, like I said, pulled me down and went 1, 2, 3, like pushed me up, went running and got the title and come back and put the U.S. title. You're the new U.S. champion. I'm like, this dude don't crack. But him and Gene Anderson both were so super nice. And like I said, the good guys were never, the baby faces, good guys, whatever you want to call them nowadays, they weren't mean. They just weren't as engaging as the heels were. I mean, they're like, yeah, here you go. Yeah, here you go. But the heels were just, they were so excited, to sit there and talk to this little kid. Not that I was sick or anything else. I was just, hey, can I have your autograph? And the only one that I tore out of this book was Piper. I actually put it in a little 5x7 frame, 4x6 frame.
Oh, there you go. Yeah. That's something you want to frame.
Yeah. Like I said, let's go over this for a minute. Like I said, all right. Jim Nelson, who later became Boris Zukov.
Yep.
He was part of the privates with Sergeant Slaughter and Don Kernodle.
Mm-hmm.
Trying to read some of these. There's Mr. Fuji. I don't know if you can see that or not. That's Mr. Fuji.
Nice.
There's somebody under him that I could not read. That's Don Kernodle. Vinny Valentino. Mike Reed was a jobber, but that's a superstar before he became Demolition Axe.
Yeah.
Let's see. Scott McGee was a jobber. Frankie, whatever his name was, I can't read his last name, but I remember he was a jobber. There's some racers. The Raging Bull, Manny Fernandez. Jimmy Valiant.
Yep.
They couldn't just go to the next page.
They just signed on the same one.
No, they were flipping all over the place. Yeah. Sonny Fargo. Remember him as Ricky Rudd. It's a racer. We'll keep going. Bill Elliott, another racer. Tommy Young. There's Ricky Steamboat. That's the first one I turned to when we started doing this. Keith Larson, he was a jobber. My mom thought he was cute, though, so I got his autograph. Ivan Koloff, Allie Bay.
Yep.
Yeah, when I don't know if I ever told you this one or not, but after a match one night, remember the old gas stations, the Hop In?
Oh, yeah.
We had stopped at a Hop In to get something. Johnny Weaver. We'd stopped at the Hop In to get something one night, and I looked over, and there was Ivan Koloff, Ali Bay, and Jake Roberts in a beat up little Datsun getting gas. And I went over there, and again, super nice people. Ivan, of course, was a bad guy, and I was asking, could I go with them? Steve Muslin, another jobber. But I was asking, could I go with them? And it was my mom and my grandma with me at the time, and Ivan Koloff pointed right at my grandma and said, only if she goes. I'm like, dude, back off. Grandma, no, man. What's wrong with you?
That's such an Ivan Koloff thing to do.
Oh, yeah. He was sitting there flirting with my grandma. And I was like, man, dude, what is wrong with you, bro? But yeah, he was, like I said, all three of them. I don't know if I got Jake's or not. I think it looked like one I would remember.
I think
Ron Ritchie, he was another jobber. I don't know if you remember him.
Not that one. No, I don't remember him. But I think my favorite one that I remember was I actually just met Cody Rhodes when he turned on Hardcore Holly as the tag champs, and he joined with Ted DiBiase Jr.
Yeah, Legacy.
And I met him, and they were showing it behind him at the place that I was getting signed. So yeah, Cody, look, you're showing your heel turn, man. I said, turn your heel turn. He goes, that's my favorite part.
Yeah, I just found Jake Roberts. Give me 1 second.
Oh, you're good. As he's writing that, and he shows the Jake Roberts, we're probably gonna, So as soon as Jason shows this autograph with Jake Roberts, I will wind down there. This is probably a good time to wind down as we're sharing these autograph moments and everything like that.
The ones I got during the Attitude Era, I've got Shawn Michaels. Yeah, there he is. I got his in a little frame. I interrupted during a lap dance while he was to get that. I've got the Undertaker on a ticket stub. I got Test on a ticket stub. I got Flair's on a WCW Nitro program from the first Nitro here. But all the earlier ones I got in that book.
Yeah, I think we can all agree that I think childhood memories. we want to hold on to those. And obviously, you guys see with Jason with his book. I wish I held more on to the autographs that I got. I do still have my autographed Playboy from Maria Kanellis. I still have.
I got the Playboy, but I don't have the autograph.
I have the autograph. So met her at the mall when I was living up in Illinois. But I think it's just the fond memories that we can have, and I think, especially tonight's topic, I do thank Jason for suggesting it, and it's just really cool to kind of talk to someone, kind of reminisce about our upbringing on professional wrestling, and and sharing with all of you, and even you guys jumping in with some of your fond memories and your opinions on pro wrestling in general. So sorry, I had to take a drink of water. I said too much, and my throat got kind of rough. But again,
it's a shame your biggest fan wasn't on here to watch you swallow on camera.
Stop. Behave yourself, Jason. Anyways, on that note, we do want to thank you guys for joining us tonight. Thank you for all the comments, Davis, Josh, and Connor in the comments. Thank you guys all for joining, listening. Make sure you guys hit that like button, subscribe. We are on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, Instagram. We're on Spotify. Every Tuesday we do AEZ Canada with our host Matt. He does a great job on that. Wednesdays we do our live Dynamite reaction. Every Thursday you can catch me here. Usually or not always with Jason joining me. Fridays we usually do our Rampage reactions, and Saturdays we usually do collisions. But going forward, we will not be no longer doing Rampage. As Connor had told me that we're gonna cut back on Rampage and do more so Dynamite and Collision, as those are the two big 2-hour shows that they have every week. And then we do sometimes do reactions to live pay-per-views. And we also do have interviews coming up. I don't know if I'm allowed to say anything yet, but our next one is going to be a really cool interview. I'll give everybody a hint. It will probably be a female wrestler. We haven't had a female wrestler on here in a while, but I'm guessing that's going to be our next interview. So make sure you guys stick around for the announcement on that. That's my hint to all you guys out there. Look at Jason thinking really hard, like, who could it be? Who could it be? But again, I do thank you guys for joining us. Jason, again, always a pleasure talking to you, especially about our memories of old school wrestling, whether it's from the territories or, from the Attitude Era or Monday Night Wars.
Absolutely. It's always a good time to stroll down memory lane. And one of the reasons, honestly, I like to do that is if for people who are watching and then like wonder why, especially my own personal view of what today's wrestling is and a lot of the stuff AEW does, maybe that'll give them some backstory on why I'm so critical of some of the stuff that I see today, is because of, what I grew up with. And again, it's if AEW is what you started watching as a your first thing in wrestling, in 15 or 20 years, you're going to look at that and compare it to that. And that's human nature. It's what we do. And it's, you like it, you don't, you don't.
And I couldn't agree 100% more. So that honestly, true words have never been spoken. So again, thank you, Jason. Always appreciated. And again, you guys can always catch us here again next Thursday. But stay tuned as the following video you guys will get is live reaction Saturday to Collision, I believe, unless Connor changes the schedule up. No. It might be next Tuesday for Canada. So you guys are just going to have to stick around to see what show comes first. So, and other than that, again, thank you guys so much. Appreciate you all. And if there's nothing else, as always, love you guys and a good night.